And am I sharing my screen now?
No.
Not yet.
Oh, there we go.
Now you are.
Okay, good enough. And I think it shows what I'm sharing, but doesn't matter. So
So
what I'm going to talk about.
before you jump in, could you just kind of, well, I guess with this group that's here, we don't really need an introduction, but I'm anticipating we will have visitors to see it through the YouTube. So if you mind, in like 2 minutes to tell us about yourself.
Okay, well, that's really cool because I'm laughing. One of the things I do at all my meetings is I tell you, look, this is what we can do. You can have 5 to 20 users, less than $12, no server-side learning, and it just works. But yeah, I do have, I talk a little bit about me, but that slide's not important and I usually skip it, okay? So I've been a technical editor on a couple of books. I was an Access MVP for 13 years. I was a beta tester for the Access Web Services. So I've been in the Access community for about 20 years now. And so that's a little blurb about me, my emails. There's 2 up there you can use. And that's all we need about that, of who I am and where I've been and what I've done. I do a lot of .NET. I do a lot of web development right now, but I'm still just every day doing tons of work with Access and SQL Server. I do lots of that. And of course, I've also web enabled some of these applications where we've done a web portal and we keep the Access application as Access because we should, because it lowers the cost and lets you get your job done. So anyway, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give a short little history lesson. Now, why do I give a little history lesson here? Well, this whole SharePoint thing with Access started 18 years ago, and that is a long, long time ago. And one of the reasons why the Access community doesn't care or use this SharePoint option that I'm going to talk about today is because it really didn't work very well, okay? It was just poorly. And in fact, I'll recall a little story that when the Access team announced that they were going to bring in and introduce a non-relational database technology into Access, well, at this Microsoft meeting on the Microsoft campus, we went crazy. Like, what are you doing to Mr. Cod? How come you're throwing him under the bus? And in fact, there was such a ruckus in that room, I wouldn't say yelling, raised voices, that other Microsoft employees down the hall had to actually get up from their desks and walk down to that room and open the door and look what the hell is going on. Because we were so despondent that they're going to destroy and damage and wreck our lovable little product called Access. But that was never the case. But so that's one of the first reasons I think that a lot of the community in Access never adopted this SharePoint business stuff with Access, okay? The second problem was it was big bucks. If you go back 15 years ago, we're talking, Fortune 500, government. These products, to get SharePoint up and running was really expensive, very high cost, and it was out of the reach of the average small little business, which is quite much where Access and a lot of us developers, we stay. I mean, I do some work for larger, but most of this Access development is not these big corporate clients with, for lack of a better word, deep pockets, okay? So all of these things kind of conspired a little bit over history to explain why not more Access developers don't choose this option, okay? Now, one of the things that happened, of course, though, was Google Docs came along and cloud-based document retrieval and ease of use in the cloud. So the folks in Redmond says, well, what do we have sitting around that works really good, is robust, and we spent a lot of money in the last 10 years on? Well, they had SharePoint. So they repackaged it and put it out as Office 365 and made it really cheap, okay? They made it dirt cheap. So us Access developers really benefit from this rise of the cloud-based option for Access, okay? And that means we can put our data in some tables and yet continue to run your desktop application on your desktop. Okay. Now, when this first happened, and I've got it on the list on the screen, in 2003, I would say about 5% of your applications that you wrote would work using the SharePoint system. It just was not a viable option or choice, and I wouldn't recommend it. But let's say you had 3 salespeople. They got to visit a city, and you got 500 people to contact. Well, they each have a laptop. They build an Access application with just a list of, say, 500 people to contact. And we all know that when you phone and contact a company, well, you got to tell your other 3 guys doing the sales that we've already contacted them, because it's quite rude to call a company again. So if you wanted to deploy a couple laptops and 3 traveling salesmen to a city, you could use the SharePoint option with Access. But it would be a simple list, and it couldn't be that big of a one. Maybe 800 records, that would be okay. So most of your applications couldn't be utilized, and this SharePoint, what we now call Office 365 option, was not a choice. However, it caught on. It caught on a lot. So then what happened is in 2007, because SharePoint was getting popular, they really improved Access 2007. I think they more than doubled, they tripled the performance, okay? So all of a sudden, hey, 10%, maybe even 20% in that range, maybe 10% of applications in Access could be utilized in SharePoint. So you have a desktop application, you have a couple of tables of data, and you could push that up to the cloud, and that would let you use Access anywhere on any desktop, and you have multi-user data. But you had no relational database. Okay, there was no relational support between tables. So it's pretty tough, because if you delete a record, you got to delete the child records and blah, blah, blah. But in 2010, things changed, okay? They improved SharePoint and added relational database abilities to the SharePoint system. Now, I don't really care how it works behind the scenes of the data storage. I just care, I've got a table, I got a child table. Does it work? Can I throw my tables up there and run my Access application? That's all I care about. And so in 2010, the performance increased by about 10 times. So every year, 2003 got better. Well, it started, 2007 got better. 2010, it was a quantum leap. Okay, and so all of a sudden the performance of your tables, when you link them to SharePoint, became workable. It was a tipping point. All of a sudden, wow, I can now put an application with tables and data, and I can move it out to the I can move it up to the cloud and run my Access application. Okay, so the problem is okay, if this is so easy and so wonderful, why don't we use it more? Or what's the downside, and why can't we use it more? So the first problem is there are some data limits. Okay, when I say this thing is just the biggest slice of bread and the most marvelous thing you ever seen, that's true. But you have to watch your data size limits. Okay, now with the standard El Cheapo bottom feeder Office 365 accounts, you have to be careful. And what I'm going to say is that when you start out the application, each of your tables should be below 5,000 rows. Okay, you can grow to 10,000 rows. Okay, but when you're starting out, if you're using the low-cost Cloud Edition Office 365, you should you want to start out with your tables below those limits. And the reason is because the uploading process and getting your data up into SharePoint with these low-cost subscriptions, they have some pretty serious data limits in terms of row counts, okay? But if you get, say you have a table of 4,000 records and you have 10 other tables of 2,000 records and they're all related, it will go up very nicely, okay? But if you have 100,000 rows or 50,000 rows, it's going to be painful to get that working. Now, I've pushed some tables up to 80,000 rows, and it worked well, okay? But not the initial upload, okay? So while I'm talking about that, the question is when I said that you don't have to change one line of code in your existing application for this option, you don't. You don't have to learn a bunch of SQL Server. You don't have to learn server-based technology. And in fact, in most cases, there's no changes to your application. But your data structures have to conform to what the relational data limitations are on the SharePoint system. Okay? So for example, your relationship, sometimes we use like a natural key, like, a social insurance number or something else for the primary key. Not allowed. So all your tables need a standard PK auto number, and your foreign keys are standard long data type foreign key. This is dead simple. We've all done it before, but that's the end of this story in the sense of how you have to set it up. And I'm going to suggest one more thing. If you look at the two screens, and I hope your screen resolution is okay, you'll notice that I've got a simple relationship set up here, customers and invoices. But you notice a slight difference on the left side and the right side? I don't know if I have a pointer here. Well, we'll move my cursor right here. If you look close on the left side, you'll notice that this is 99% of what you Access developers do. You got the parent table, you make the child table, you've got the relationship, okay? But on the right side, you'll notice there's a little arrow there. And the reason is because I said I want this to be a left join. Now, when I say left join, I just mean that it's just like when you're building a query in the query builder. You can go, when you drop the join over, and if you right click on the relationship arrow in the query builder, you can choose where they're equal or select all the parent guys. So I'm going to recommend that if you have an existing database and a set of tables that you're going to move up with relational data to SharePoint, I'm going to suggest that you do the right side. Just go into your tables, and in fact, I'm going to do this in this demo, is just right-click on the relationship and make it a left join. Now, I could do an hour presentation on left joins in the query designer, because from a developer's point of view, they don't make a difference, but from a documentation point of view, they do. And when you're moving tables up to SharePoint, it also makes a difference. Now, so that's pretty much the end of what you have to do, okay? So every single table, including your combo boxes and drop lists, sometimes, we just got a little selection box and we put 10 items into a little tiny table and it doesn't have a PK and FK, or in this case, a PK. Even when you're just selecting the text, I might have like, a gender or a simple little salutation drop down. And I might not set it all up as a relational database. I just got a combo box. I need 10 choices. I put them in there. And maybe I'll drive it from another table. But the value I'm taking from there, I put into the actual text field in that combo box. And if it is a foreign key and PK, like we often do again in Access, this is nothing new to you people, then I recommend that you actually put that in the relationships window. I find that a lot of my applications, I got a combo box. Here's 10 rows from a little table. Use the wizard, I got the combo box, okay? But if you're going to move your data up to SharePoint, you want to make that little drop list or child or that little table you have in your relationships window, you want to add that to the relationships diagram. And it's critical to do that because when you say to this thing, please shove it up to SharePoint, it looks at that information. So your nice relationships window that you have in your application, you want to definitely have that correct. So what I'm going to do here is let's go over to a typical Access application. And basically what we have, the most simplest thing in the world, we've got our Access front end, which is the application part, right? And then you've got your back end and it's split and it's linked. Now, I'm pretty sure all of you people being fairly hardcore, you know that, okay? So another really interesting thing about this whole SharePoint thing is I am using a bottom feeder, El Cheapo, lowest cost possible account for this, okay? You look at this now, these are Canadian prices, okay? Now, $6.40, that's like $5 American. Now, I haven't tried this bottom feeder account to see if it works with what I'm about to do, but the far one on the right for $11, that's like $8.50 US, that works. You can use that. You can have one account, one log on, and you can hang 20 users off of it, okay? Each of the users that connects does not need a 365 account. They don't need a Microsoft account. They can use any corporate logon or any email they want, okay? And you can have 20 users, multi-user in the cloud for $8.50 a month US. It's an incredible option that I'm going to show here. So this is dirt cheap, okay? And it works really well. Okay, so I'm going to go, whoops, that's the wrong page here. So what I'm going to do is, let's go back to the screen here. And so we've got a typical Access application. It's got your front end and your back end. Now, obviously, the front end is going to be pretty straightforward. And I'm going to use Access 2010 for this. I'm going to use a non-365 version of Access. I want to stress carefully that you do not have to use subscription-based versions of desktop Access for this to work. And not only that, is for all the customer machines or those 5 laptops that you send out the door on the road, you can use the Access Runtime, okay? So this is really slick because basically for $8.50 a month, you can have 15 multi-users deployed anywhere on the planet, and they're all sharing the same database, okay? So in this Access application, I think we've got this pretty straightforward here. I've got a customers table. We've got invoices for each customer, InvoiceDetail. This is a classic, simple database setup. And if I were to launch this, it's a simple, a very, very simple application. It's a rough sketched one, but and it's basically a company and then each invoice, and I can drill down and open up an invoice inside. And for each of those invoices, you have the classical invoice billing detail for that, okay? So I might want to have this application run by a couple of, say, my employees that are doing billing for clients. So we could give them this billing app, and they could go to any client's site or anywhere, and it would be multi-user. And we're talking about a standard desktop edition of Access, even runtime or a non-based 365 version of Access, okay? And you just use that $8.50 account, okay? So I'm going to close this, and what we're going to do now is I'm going to open up the backend database. So that front end is linked to your standard couple little bit of tables here. And we have here, again, this is our backend. We've all done a linked database, nothing new here. But what we're going to do is I'm going to bring up the relationships window. I'm going to take a little peekaboo at this here. So in here, we've got our classic setup, a list of customers. That's just the customer database. Each customer has some invoices. And then for each invoice, you've got the lines of invoice detail. And then I have a couple little lookups that are used for drop-downs. Next to invoices and invoice numbering table, I got VBA code. It grabs the last invoice number, increments it by 1, saves it, just my own custom auto number. So there's a little bit of VBA code here and there in this application, but we don't have to change any of it when we use SharePoint. And then I've got a little task list, again, just a drop-down that drives a combo box and a projects. Now, very important here, in these 3 little tables I have that I use for those drop-down combo boxes, in my application, I'm storing the text value, okay? So for task, I don't have a related lookup that we normally should do or should have done, where I store the ID in the table and look up, say, the task name, okay? I'm actually storing the task as a text in the actual table. So for example, when I select a task from this little combo box over here, I didn't store the ID, but I could have and probably should have. And a lot of Access applications, when we do that, we don't set up a relationship between these 2 tables. Absolutely put one in, even if you're not going to enforce it, okay? And there's a huge reason why. Is because when you push this stuff up to SharePoint, it messes with your auto numbers. They get all changed. So your Access application better follow that long time 20-year rule that I don't care about what an auto number is. I don't look at them. I don't mess with them. But when you push your data up to, say, SQL Server or other databases, those IDs stay the same. But in SharePoint, it messes with them. Now, you don't care. But when you upload, if the primary key in my customers table is customer ID, and the invoice table has this relationship here where customer ID is linked back to it, I could update this data to SQL Server or another database, and I wouldn't care as long as the auto numbers and the foreign key numbers stay the same. But when you push up to SharePoint, it makes new auto numbers for you. And because of that, you better have these relationships set up before you push up to SharePoint. And I don't mean maybe, I mean absolutely. Okay. So now here's your typical application. We could have had more tables and more relationships. Just keep in mind the restrictions. PKs are auto numbers. The foreign keys in the child tables are the foreign key number, and that's it. Okay. So even in this table here in invoices, and you do realize you can go into design mode from the ER diagram. Okay. And it's just a standard plain Jane access table. There's nothing magic here, nothing new, nothing out of the ordinary. Okay. So how do we get this up to SharePoint and do this magical trick of deploying 10 people on laptops across the country, and they're all using the same data? And all you have to do is get them a copy of the Access front end, and you're off to the races, and they're in business. Now, when they launch the app the first time, they will be required to log in. And that login can be their email address that they have. You just have to invite them from SharePoint. And there's no requirement for being an Office 365 account for those guest users. So you can deploy this to 10 users in a company without 365 accounts or licensing, all for $8.50 a month. Multi-user on the road, robust, shared database in the cloud for absolutely no cost or next to nothing. So here's the question then. So as I stated, the other beautiful part about this compared to, say, SQL Server or other cloud-based database systems, in those other systems, you have to learn how to use that database system. You got to learn SQL Server. You're going to have to learn a lot of stuff. With this choice, you don't have to learn anything. Nothing at all. We can be just a happy little Access developer. That's all you have to be. So how do we move this data up? And we're going to do this right now. First thing I have to do is you have to get to your Office 365 account. And that's where I am right here. And it doesn't matter. I've got some sites and stuff up here. It doesn't matter. And all you need to do, and even your minimal account, is go to your team site. Okay, we're not going to do a SharePoint lesson today because that's boring. And I don't want you to have to know anything about SharePoint. So all you do is you go to your team site, and we're going to create a new site for this application. That's all we're going to do. And I'm going to go over to sites here. And all I want to do is I've got some test sites, and even some old ones here. Even this account, like look at this first one, 2011. So isn't that cool? So these are all sites where I actually have published my Access database to use from your desktop Access. But what we're going to do is we're just going to make a new one here. And it's really simple. Make a subsite in your team site. That's the only thing in this whole discussion that you're going to have to remember about SharePoint, okay? Hey, Pug Cool Demo. I'm going to give it a name. And then I'm going to give it a URL. And I'm just going to call it AU Pug 5. I think that's right. That's close enough. Okay. And that's it. I'm not going to do anything more. Anything else you don't care about. This is not going to be a SharePoint, and I don't want you to have to worry about it. Okay. So just remember that AU Pug 5. Okay. So that's the only thing I got to remember here. So I'm just going to create this. Okay. So it's going to create this subsite, and that's where our database and tables are going to go. So it says working on it. It doesn't take very long, and we're done. Okay. So we've got a web page here, but I don't care. We're done. Okay, that's it. And the rest of this now occurs in Access. And we don't need any more interaction with server-side skills, okay? So you're going to have to figure out how to log into your 365 account, that $8.50 El Cheapo one. You don't need to buy even an Office subscription with this. Just get the cheapest one you can find. And that's it. So at this point in time now, I've got my little database. We've got our related tables here, and we're going to push this whole mess up to SharePoint, go to the front end, change our linked tables, and Bob's your uncle, okay? So let's do that. So we're going to go to SharePoint, and it basically says, where do you want to move your data? I mean, I can handle this, okay? So, and I've got one because I've been playing with, but it was ABPUG 5 is where we went, okay? And I'm just going to hit next here, and my data is going to go up. Now, in this database, it has about, the largest table is only about 3,000 records, okay? So, so I'm just going to click next here, and hopefully this table will go up. There we go. So what happens is it goes and looks at the related tables you have, and it starts building the schemas for all your tables on SharePoint, and it creates the linked tables, and then it'll just start pushing up the data, okay? And it is a bit slow, so you've got to be patient. For larger data sets, like I said, you want this to start below 5,000, and there's two reasons why. The first reason is it just takes forever, okay? The second reason is that if your table is larger than 5,000 rows, after it shows up the table, it has to put indexes on your columns. And if the table's more than 5,000 records, the cheap accounts don't let you do that. If you get below 5,000 records and it puts the tables up into SharePoint, then what happens is it'll index everything and build all the indexing and do the whole absolutely thing for you. And then what it'll happen is you can grow those tables to 10,000 rows, okay? But you got to start out small, okay? And secondly, how is the performance with 10,000 rows in a cloud database when you don't touch one line of your VBA code? Record set code, update code, all kinds of stuff. It works extremely well, okay? It's an excellent running system. And in fact, in some cases, compared to Azure SQL running in the cloud, this setup will run absolute circles around SQL Server in terms of performance. You're going, what? That's correct. Now, when you get large data, it's going to start running slower. But if you have a row of 10,000 records and you say group on it, sort on it, and query it against that database, SharePoint and Access, or Office 365, will blow SQL Server away in that process. And the reason is, this might not work because I skipped a step. Oh, let me get up there. Okay. I skipped a little step here, but that doesn't matter. I've seen what it says here. Copying data. Oh, hey, look at that. It's still going. 43% invoices. Okay. Well, look at that. This is going pretty good. I skipped a little step, and I forgot this in my notes. And even in my notes here, I do. The reason why the new SharePoint option with Access works so good is because Access actually stores the data local. Okay. And it synchronizes with the cloud. So if you have 10,000 rows and you run a report, you got 10,000 records local. It doesn't even hit the cloud. So it's actually faster than SQL Server in the cloud, because in SQL Server, you might have to pull down 10,000 rows. In Access, you're working local. And in fact, you're working unsplit. So you actually get better performance than even a split database on your local Office network, say a couple computers sharing a back end. You can actually get better performance with this setup than on your local network. That's how amazing it is. But for larger data sets, there are problems, okay? And while this is uploading, I'm going to mention one more limitation of what kind of applications absolutely do not work well for this option. Let's say you have an application that pulls 5,000 rows, and in Access land, that's nothing. And you have to update and process 5,000 rows, and you save the data. And let's say you run another little process that does 4,000 rows. You know what? Those applications are no for SharePoint, because what happens is when you update a row, it has to synchronize with the cloud. So for applications that do a lot of data, like temp table, throw a bunch of records in there, throw them in that table, run the report in that temp table, delete the temp table, you can't do it. Applications that update a lot of rows, a lot of processing, Again, they don't work well. They run really slow. But for an application with, say, 5 or 10,000 records, you're adding a record, you're editing a record, you're retrieving a record, you're editing related data, no problemo. So just keep in mind that there is a pretty big class of applications that won't work very well with this setup, okay? Now, hopefully this works. Oh, look at this. Good. I think we're almost there. So it takes a couple of minutes. We like I said, about 3,000 records. I am on a Wi-Fi connection right now, by the way. But once your data is up there, your performance issues are extremely, really, really good, okay? And it's copying the properties over, so this is going really quite well. So those are the limitations. Okay, there we go. So we're now, I upsize this, and when I hit finish, watch what happens. Look at that. See the tables? They're all these Mr. Orange cute little tables, and if you hover over the cursor, it shows that it's actually a table on that particular place, okay? And we can open up these guys, and if I do, heck, let's open up the largest table. Well, actually, we'll do that in a second, okay? So I don't want to do, I want to keep some phone numbers out of this, so I think there's some numbers in there. Let's just close that. But anyway, you can see how it just responds instantly like a normal table, and yet this is now a table in the cloud. And in fact, let's go InvoiceDetail, and I think that's 2,500 rows, okay? And you'll notice that it's instant. And this is the first time loading it. And now, if I close this and get out of the application, that table's cached locally. So now when I open it again, you can see it's practically instant. And in fact, it's faster than if this was a SQL table in the cloud. Isn't that neat? So it's really slick. It works really well. So now let's close our backend and go back. And you'll notice that when it upsizes, our backend tables were automatically renamed and pushed up to SharePoint, and it automatically makes a copy of the original for you. So I have a thing called data backup. Now let's go into our front end, and let's get this hooked up to SharePoint. Okay, so this is the actual application, and these were the links to the back end. Okay, but that is the standard old plain Jane back end. Let's just get rid of them all. I'm going to delete all 5 of them. And all we have to do is link this to the SharePoint site, and we are done. So my tables are all gone. So we'll go external data, and we are going to choose, let's see, import link, and we're going to go SharePoint list. And we want to link to these guys, and we called it Pug 5 is what we called it. Okay. And I go next, and you'll notice again that I only went to the SharePoint website one time and created the subsite. After that, everything else we're doing is inside of the Access UI, and I uploaded more than once here, but that's all right. Okay. Let's go back here. Did I choose the right guy? Well, it doesn't matter. I'll choose 5. I thought that's interesting. I must have uploaded in. Okay, it doesn't matter. AU. I don't care if it's got multiple extra tables. That's okay. Yeah, I uploaded more than once, but we'll select our customers table, our invoice details table. So I uploaded more than once here, and hopefully that's okay. Next invoice, and so normally you would just have the 5 tables there and maybe one extra one, but let's go projects, and that looks pretty good. So let's just make sure I got that. I got customers, and I apologize for the extra ones in there, but not a big deal. Invoice detail, invoices, my next invoice, my projects, and I believe there was a table called tasks in here. Yeah. You know, that still doesn't seem to be the right site. It doesn't matter. I'll go with 5, but I thought I gave this a AU PG5. I'll just go with this one. Yeah, okay, let's do this. Okay, let's make it quick here. So customers, I just have a feeling I'm not selecting the right. I am not.
Albert, I think it was APUG5.
There, like that, yeah.
I think
Here, why don't,
it's APU.
yeah, AUPUG5, that's what it was. Okay. There, thank you very much. Yeah, that's PUG5. There we go. That looks better. There we go. There we go. So that was so simple. Oops.
No, that's not.
Well, we can do this a neat little way here. Let's see where it went. Oh, I typed in team site. That's why. Okay. I gave you the wrong one. I don't want to do it again. So I put it into the base team site. I missed typing the AOPG5. So by hovering my cursor over here, you can see where the tables are linked, right? So I just shoved them into the base site. Make a subsite, okay? So let's just use that one. Okay. I want to use what I typed in there. So I put it into team site. Good enough. That's your base site. And you can shove multiple databases into one, but I don't recommend that, okay? So that's what we did. That's good enough. Let's take this guy here. Perfect. Okay, so that's what I did wrong here, but no worries. So we got the customers, the invoices, the next invoice, and let's make this simple. I got a little projects lookup, and the other ones I don't think are, and tasks. And next invoice. I think that's, let's go. Customers, invoices.
How about InvoiceDetail?
Oh, thank you very much. See, that's where you go. Now we know why having two people coding works. Okay, and that's good enough. And let's just go okay. So basically, all I did was delete my linked tables to the back end that I had on my desktop, and poof, there I'm done. So now I have my tables, my front end. So these used to point to the standard Access backend. We took the backend, shoved it up to the SharePoint, and now we simply just have these little tables like this, and our data's here. And even the invoice detail, like I say, so that is the wrong table I took. Darn it anyway. That's okay. So basically, if I go with customers, my application is here running. So, and I'm not sure why I took the wrong. I must have grabbed. Oh, the invoice detail table existed, so it used a different one. Well, let's grab it. Let's take this guy out, and let's just delete him here. It doesn't really matter. So at this point, though, you can see how easy it was to move. Let's delete him. Sure, let's remove this guy. And, ooh, okay. Okay, doesn't matter. So I typed in the wrong site name, so I didn't put it up to AP5, and I should probably remigrate our backend again. I should probably do this again, and I have a copy to do it. But regardless, here we are with our tables and our application, and the VBA code and everything else that say we have inside of this, everything should just work, okay? It's pretty cool, okay? And what that means is that any particular code that you have in here that you've written, no matter what it does, all code, everything you have in this application should run unchanged, which is quite remarkable, okay? So you don't have to redo your code. You don't have to do your forms. You don't have to do anything. The biggest challenge is to simply ensure that you've got those relationship rules I stated to you to follow. And you follow that, and you're off to the races, okay? So it's really, really easy what I did here. And it's not particularly all that hard. And so that's pretty much all I have to show you, because it's that easy, and that's all you need to know. So there you go. So at this point in time, I can stop sharing and we can, I'll take some questions, and that's pretty much the where we stand with this. And I think I can close. Oh, there it is right there. Okay, and we'll stop that, and we're back.
Okay, great. Thank you, Albert. We did have a few questions in the chat, so I'll just start at the top.
Oh, good. I forgot to put the chat. I would have stopped during the talking. I would have done so.
Well,
But
you
that's all
were on
right.
a roll. That was great. I took notes here, and I'm going to find the. Okay, so
If I open the chat window, can I see it
you should be
here?
able to
Oh,
see
there it
it.
is. Okay, excellent. Okay, there we go. Okay, great. Okay, what about a single lookup table with a column to separate different lookups? Yes, your standard. The trick with that is I hope we mean in our community, the concept of a lookup and lookup table often means like, okay, we've got a combo box. There's 10 choices. We, use the wizard to put that combo box on a form. That's considered a lookup. And then there's also what we call the table lookups, which is it's that thing that confuses our brains. What's it called? Confuses. Okay. We have a long time thing in our community. What was it called?
Access.
Yes, okay. Well, we have this thing in our community where we say don't use lookup tables. It turns out, this is really surprising, that if you have those nasty lookup tables, if you go to SQL Server or any other database system, you have to go fix those. Believe it or not, with SharePoint you don't. They just go right up. They actually work. And if you have several combo boxes or lookups in a table, let's say on a form, classic access, the combo box driven by the query and it saves the ID, that will absolutely work. But even if they're lookups, because somebody didn't know better, they actually go up to SharePoint too. They just go right up. And so it's actually easier than SQL Server in that case. Now, I don't want to sugarcoat this too much. I will say that while it's a walk in the park, if your data fits correctly, it just goes up to SharePoint. It's a no-brainer. I didn't learn SQL Server. I don't know anything about databases. It just works. And that includes lookup tables attached to a parent-child table or just a couple of columns in a table where they're driven by a combo box, even several by the same table. They all work, but it was extremely easy to do this. And I did not have to do any server-side learning except I created a site, and then when I picked upload, I uploaded it to the wrong site. And that's easy enough to mess up. I just did. So it works just fine, and it works for both cases. It works for a classic. I've got a column that stores an ID, and I've got another table, and we have the standard relationship. It's a combo box, but even if you used an access lookup table, it still works. It absolutely works. So it's pretty cool.
Jack, did that address your question?
Yeah, well my point was is that to me, I try to keep the number of tables I use as much as possible. And so instead of having a table for states, a table for countries, as separate lookups, I might have a single table that has state and country as two different categories of lookups, such that one list gives me the information versus having to have so many of them. Because like I say, I hate to open up someone's database and find that they've got 100 tables.
That's a really good idea, especially if it's a couple that are kind of, sort of related to something. So, why create 3 tables if it's got a state, a city, and a couple, and you can repurpose it. And in those cases, you're still probably storing the ID of that.
Sometimes, okay.
And sometimes not. That will absolutely work seamless.
Because I tended to like storing the value, such as the state in the field, or the name of the product, because somewhere along the way they come up with a different product, and it's like, hold it, it's a different product. You can't just go change the name on that old product because it's not the same one anymore, even though we call it the same.
Yeah, there is a big case to be made for that. And I actually, in a lot of cases, especially if you're going to move data around between machines, I just did a work where I had a synchronized, it's an Access application. The back end is SQL, but we're synchronizing to Android handheld devices. And I wrote the software for all three. And it turns out that I actually took a bit of your design and I tried to avoid some of the PK, foreign K, and for some of the drops, I just put the text in because it was becoming very difficult. Now, I am a fanatic that when I've got drop lists, I love the PK, foreign K. I just love those. And I use them everywhere, but I very, very much have a high and probably fairly recent respect for what you just stated. In a lot of cases, yes. If you do this PK, foreign K, and somebody goes and changes that list or tries to edit it, your whole database has changed. So you have a good point. There's pros and cons, but I take that with a high degree of confidence. It's not a bad idea. Not always, but it's not a bad idea. Okay, indexes that you create. Okay, that's a good question. Set your indexes up in Access. Just get them all right in Access before you talk about SharePoint. Get nice indexing on this column, that column. When you obviously drag and drop your relationships in Access, it creates indexes behind the scenes. Get them all working the way you love before you shove it up to SharePoint. I'm just telling you, don't do it after. But if you're below 5,000 rows, then you can do it on the server and you can go into the SharePoint tables. But it turns out that you don't have to. Like, let's add an index. This is what's so neat about this whole thing is you want to go into SQL Server and create an index. I don't know how to do that. How do you do all that stuff? Well, in fact, I can do this right inside of. Well, I can do this right inside the front end. It doesn't matter. I can do it in any. This is quite funny, actually. Let's just bring this up. What I'll do is I'll share my screen, and I'll show you. I want to add an index. Now, if all your indexes work just like they do in Access, okay? But let's assume, and I'll just do a quick share here. I think I can do this. Yep. This will take 2 seconds, and I don't want to do it long. And let me just share this. Okay, so let's go share and... Oh, screen 2. There we go. Okay, so if you look here, we've got those 5 linked tables to SharePoint.
Oh, there we go. We just
okay, good. Yeah, okay, just getting behind me. Okay, so we've got our tables that are now linked and they're orangey because they're now SharePoint tables. But here's the cool thing is let's say we want to add an index on customers, okay? So what happens here is you can actually, let's say city would be a poor example, but we can actually go like this. I think it's being covered up here. The bar's on the top here a little bit, so we'll just do it like this. Okay. So you can just go over to fields and you can set the field size, the type, and see the indexed here? You can just click on it. So I can say, please index it. And what will happen is it went up to SharePoint and did all the work for me. So, and I don't believe you have table design mode, but you have table layout mode. So if you open the table, you know how there's the extra column at the very end to add? So I can add new fields to this too. I can add a field. But let's just close this. I don't think design view will work, but let's see what happens. Nope, you can't use design view, but you can use layout. So just click on the table and go over to fields and pick your field and index it. And if you want to add a new column, you can add new columns after the fact. Just use that. You have to use the table layout mode. You don't get design mode. But I'll tell you, that's a small price to pay for not having to go to learn SharePoint. I can add new fields, new indexes. I can do whatever the hell I want. And I don't have to know anything. I don't have to know anything about this. So yeah, it's pretty good that way. So that's a great question. So you don't have to, you know, you don't have to learn, you don't have to do much. You can add indexes and columns to after the fact, and you don't have to learn a brand new servers technology. It's all done from the Access UI. So there's nothing new to learn. Now, a couple people, and this is, of course, who said
We
that?
disconnected.
Oh, disconnected. That's really neat. While doing this demo, while running the application, I was going to unplug my network plug. But, you know, when you sit on a branch on a tree and you saw the branch off, I would cut this presentation, wouldn't I? So, yes, you can. What's neat about this is I wanted to get a little bit of the architecture, but our time is just going along just perfect right now.
Mm-hmm.
The way this data system works is that it's doing behind the scenes a real-time data sync with SharePoint, and behind the scenes, it's web service based. And that means it's message based, and that means this is more like email. You know how when you send an email, it keeps retrying and working that way? And if you ever get an ODBC connect with access to the server, it's real nasty. You got to disconnect. It gives you nasty error messages. This is a web service behind the scenes. And so it works like email. So what happens is you can be using the application while you're typing away and pull your network plug out and just keep on working. And when you get reconnected that network, it'll start syncing again. So you can work disconnected. And it works really well. So you could send these 4 salespeople out to, you know, the underground subway system to do an inspection or something, type all this data in, and when they get back up to the real world, and you get Wi-Fi or any internet connection, it starts syncing again. And it's all multi-user. So any of those 10 users, they go and edit data, it'll appear in your application. And you didn't have to do any changes. So it's a really neat and a very, very robust internet technology in the sense that it's not like ODBC. ODBCs do not like disconnects. And in this case, this thing, you connect, and if your internet is spotty or poor or intermittent, the application just keeps on running. It just works. So it's a great play and a great idea. And as you can see, I didn't write any code. I didn't go to SharePoint. I did this 100% from Access and just clicked one button and said, shove the tables up there. And all you got to do is remember those rules I said. PKFK, no natural keys. Every single table that's involved with any other table, draw the lines. You don't even have to enforce relationship. Now, if you look in this case, and I'm gonna bring up the, it doesn't, well, I could bring up the data, is I did enforce those relationships for cascade delete. So if I delete a customer in this database, it will cascade delete the invoices and the invoice details. So here's another one. Kevin's talking about, he's got 300 megs and 500 megs or 900 megs, and he's moving to Azure. Extracting the data? Well, if the Access works, fire up Access, and while you're looking at the link table, right-click on it and say convert to local. It's one mouse click, okay? And it'll put that data as local. So just right-click on these guys and go convert to local, convert to local. You'll have the data in Access, and then you use your upsizing SQL Server migration assistant to SQL Server, and you're off to the races. But I mean, 300 megs of data. Okay, you're getting more hardcore. Obviously, being Kevin. I mean, that's one of the other reasons why I think not as many people use this technology is because I'll tell you what. When you get to the point of the level of most of the people at these groups and your skill levels, you're getting pretty complex applications, and as a result, they become valuable, and because they're valuable, they tend to have more data. And as you get more and more data, you're talking, 10,000 rows or 300 megabytes or whatever. Well, that just gets too big and too slow for Access. But I'll tell you what, if your row sets are only, like, say the biggest table is only 15,000 rows or something, you'll actually, in a lot of cases, still get much better performance with this architecture than you will with SQL Azure to the client desktop. Client desktop access to SQL Azure in the cloud, you have to optimize the hell out of your code and make sure those forms, datas, queries do not pull excess data. When you use the SharePoint option, you don't care. You do not have to optimize your code much. The only killer is you better not have code that says, well, here's 10,000 rows and I'm going to run an update query against it. Don't do it. You can't do it. I'm sorry. I wish I could sugarcoat this. And somebody comes up, well, is there any way I can SharePoint with some server-side SharePoint code? No, it doesn't actually work. This is very counterintuitive. In SQL Server, I can execute one SQL command from Access up to the server and say update those 10,000 rows, and you have no network bandwidth. In SharePoint, even if you say, I'm going to build some workflow or put some code up on the server and say update those 10,000 rows, it starts a 10,000 row synchronization process. So you don't get around that. Updates of large data sets are slow as a dog. So applications, pull up a record, add a record, make a new invoice, work with it, you get great performance. But if you have a data looping process type application, don't do this, okay? There is limitations, I'm telling you, okay? And it does not good look for row by row, lots of processing. This ain't gonna work. It's not gonna work well. But for a typical application, pull up a record, add records, even a couple related tables, Bob's your uncle. It works fantastic.
Okay, we have a couple more questions and we've got about 5 more minutes. Crystal wants to know if you're using 2010 because of being able to work disconnected, or is that just?
No, I used 2010 because I wanted to show the fact that I'm using an $8.50 non-subscription based SharePoint or Office 360 account, and it'll work with any version from 2010 all the way up to 2016, and there's absolutely no changes in performance in what I just did. It all works. It's as simple as could be.
So there's one more question in there, and then we'll. Is there a limit on how big a text field can be to be indexed?
Probably. I don't know the actual limits. You have to be careful because on these El Cheapo accounts, there's not only, remember I talked about that 5,000 row limit? I said that you want to be below it for your first upload. When it finishes uploading, it goes through all that indexing process. That indexing process will not run correctly if your original table is more than 5,000 rows. You can grow it to 10,000 rows, and each record you add is indexed, blah, blah, blah. But adding indexing to larger tables, you're screwed, okay? So there's also a limit on the number of columns too. It's about 65. You have to be careful. Now on the higher accounts and a full SharePoint account, you've got 255, or actually, there's no limits. So be careful on your table limits. Good databases generally don't have more than about 60, 70 fields, but some do. And if you have on-site SharePoint, like say your business has it, then you can get these limits turned off. And you can run like row limits, indexing limits, even the upsizing, like upsize 20,000 rows. All those limits can be turned off if you have an on-site edition of SharePoint. And I think if you have a full SharePoint hosted account, you can do the same. But for this El Cheapo, cost you absolutely nothing. You're not even paying for a subscription to Office and Access and Word or anything. This thing will work, and it'll work for absolutely no cost. And you can even use the runtime if you want. So it's pretty cool. It's a possible thing. Even in the current environment, a lot of people that might have 4 or 5 people, a little user work group of people, and you've got an application that they're using. You can use this option, and they're all just running. And you don't have to rewrite the software. You don't go to learn SQL Server. You don't got to do anything. But your data better follow those rules I said to you. PKFK, auto numbers. That's it. Nothing else, and it better be clean. Okay? And that's pretty much it.
Any other questions for Albert before we wrap it up? Okay, there's no more in the chat. Nobody has a question. Well, I want to thank you, Albert, for doing this. I wanted to hear this from you for quite a while, and glad to have the opportunity to do it.
Excellent. Thanks.
Look forward to the next one. We'll be in touch down the road for the follow-up.
Yeah, this time we did really good time here too. We went just a bit longer, but that was about perfect. And like I say, there's a couple more I've wanted to do too. And in fact, I had one last week I said I should do, and I can't remember for somebody. But regardless, I could, like I say, eventually maybe hit me up in a month or two if you don't have anybody. And I might do one on the ribbon. I don't think the ribbon is as useful as this one. I like talking about how to use the ribbon, and I have an example application of what we thought about and how you think about why it's going to work well. And then I also have a set of techniques that allow you to take the buttons on your existing form and have the ribbon buttons directly call those buttons on the form without making a whole bunch of external code or, external sub callback routines from the ribbon, which is just a nightmare. It's really, really hairy, scary. And that's another reason why we don't use the ribbon, is because half of them don't like them, the other people avoid them, and the third group of people start writing code for that thing, and they go, oh my gosh. And so there's a trick to doing this ribbon stuff that you can actually repurpose this, and it works exactly the same code that you used to use for making custom menu bars work. It works the same way, and you can do that. Most people don't realize that. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thank you very
I'm so
much.
glad to share this little idea, and you guys be super duper.
Okay, and I'm going to do a little preview. David Nealey, who's in the meeting tonight, has agreed to do a presentation next month. And he will be talking about how he uses graphics in his Access databases. And I won't even try to explain it because it's a little over my head. But I'm looking forward to hearing how he implements really, really complex graphics with Access in very, as he says it, very low code. So I'm looking forward to that. And then down the road, we'll get Albert back. And if anybody else has anything they'd like to share, we're always looking forward to that.
Yeah. And Brent, good for you to do these little meetings. Like I say, I hopefully, I don't know if you record them and post them after,
Yep.
but
Yep.
they're really good to do
Post
that.
it to YouTube.
Excellent. And it's nice to have a little bit of content like that. There's when I look at this whole situation, these little aspects of Access, I think, are hidden gemstones. And I mean, a breakout for a couple of hours of code, or how to, say, learn and work with SQL Server, I think they tend to be a little bit too much for these meetings. But this little guy is so easy. Okay, just
Yeah.
keep those
And
limits
I've
in mind.
noticed that, we may get 10 or 15 people in a meeting, but the same video will be viewed by 150, 200 people. So
Excellent.
we have the reach. So again, thank you very much. Everybody.
No worries. No worries. It was really easy and fun, and it was just a walk in the park. And like I say, the only thing I did is I picked the wrong site to upload to, and who cares? It doesn't matter.
We've all done that.
Well, yeah, no, I don't care. I don't care. It's so simple and easy. Like I say though, you can be frustrated, but I spent one screen on SharePoint, and the rest is all Access, man. You're home free.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much. I'll end the recording and the meeting, and I'll see you all next month, same time. Hopefully.
Yeah, I'll even try to attend the meeting too. So I'm looking forward to that.
We'd
And
love
you
to
guys,
have.
all good, all fun, all excellent. Okay.
Right.
And cheers.
Thanks. Good night, everybody.
Absolutely.
Recording is. Now, before we go,